All right. So today's event, thank you for joining our webinar. It's actually being co-hosted by Mент.io and by Microsoft. And we have an amazing panel. We have from Simon Fraser, Terry Griffith. She is the Keith BD Chair in Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Simon Fraser University. We have Jen Bill, the Executive Director and Executive Education in BD School of Business in Simon Fraser, and Dr. Anat Itai Sarig. She is both the Ment Head of Academic Partnership and an adjunct professor in IDC. I'm very excited to hear what they have to share with us today. We're going to talk to you about student engagement, obviously about how it changed in the last year due to COVID, about the technological stack that is being evolving all the time. And I think you'll hear a lot about the Simon Fraser's story, their approach to innovation. You'll hear about Microsoft, who is Mент.io's partner in that journey, and their perspective about it. And obviously, I think it would be great if we give you as much time to ask questions. Some of you have shared with us your question ahead of the webinar, and we already plan to address them, but use the chat option to just be dynamic and ask any question you'd like. We're happy to address it. The panelists will be here to give you their tricks and tips and best practices. And I'm really, really excited about what they have to say. A word about Mент.io, the company we are from that is hosting the event. Mент.io is a discussion board, but unlike a traditional discussion board, it is really intended to drive student engagement. It has a lot of analytics in the backend, and it eventually helps instructors like yourself with student assessment, with improving engagement, and it kind of teaches students to express themselves in a deeper and more meaningful way. And I think that's what we are about today. We're going to talk about how to engage students, about active learning. I can't wait to get started. I'll just show you one screen of how a Ment discussion looks so you'll have context, because you'll hear about it, the experience of Simon Fraser from using the tool. But we'll quickly then hand over to Microsoft and then to our panelists who will share their experience. So this is the tool. As you can see in the homepage, any instructor can ask question, and the question is then being addressed by the students. The instructor serves as the facilitator. Let's say they're asking the students about a way to measure well-being. If you have any experience with a discussion board as part of the LMS, whether it's Canvas, Blackboard, Moodle, or others, you're already seeing by now that the user interface is much more sleek. It is really encouraging students to participate, to vote, to reply, to really engage and kind of speak their mind in a very constructive form. That's what we're talking about when we mean deepening your arguments. So here is the student who's answering, and immediately you can see the discussion ongoing underneath her answer with agreements, a comment from the instructor themselves, someone who's here to challenge the argument, and so forth. A lot to show you, but all you need to see from now is that the discussion is really dynamic. You can navigate very easily. You can see the different interaction points of students and their meaningful comments, and a lot of more things that we might get into later on in the process. This is Mент.io. Quickly, I'm jumping to Nancy Teodoro, our education partner lead for Microsoft and my partner in this event. Just if you'd like to introduce yourself, Nancy.
Sure. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here and to learn from SFU and with Mент.io. So I'm just thrilled that we have such a great partner here with a phenomenal customer to tell their story about how they're engaging in more deeper engagement and learning with students. So I know this has been a tough year for all our customers, and customers are at different phases, when they're in their journey, whether it's hybrid learning or complete remote learning. Tools like this, I think, are so critically important to drive the engagement with the students. So couldn't be more thrilled. And the other thing I also wanted to just mention is thank you as well for running your solution on Azure on our cloud platforms, and have the security and the privacy that all our customers are looking for. So thank you. So I'll just turn it back to you. So thanks again for including me today.
Yes, thank you, Nancy. So let's not kid ourselves. They're here to hear from Jen, from Terry, and from Anat. So let's get this started. Terry, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you. I want to hear about your last year. Like, what kind of adaptations you had to do when you were facing COVID and you needed to change some things about your learning methods?
Well, Zvika, as you might imagine, we've just come full cycle. And if you had asked me a year ago, would I be having the opportunity to improve on the methods that I used in terms of going fully online, I would have said, no, this will never last a year. So the fact that I've had so many opportunities to improve on my online teaching is a little bit sad. But as I was thinking about it, in our discussion of face-to-face, hybrid, online, I guess I have almost always taught in a hybrid mode, in that I, as soon as I had access to online tools, would have the students doing some things in that online setting, but then of course would come together, once a week, twice a week for that face-to-face interaction. And so really the big shift for me was in that component that had been face-to-face, switching that out. And now, both working with executives, with Jen, working with our degree students, I've taught along the whole range of hybrid. In the cases where I'd say I'm mostly online, I'm still, obviously, for social distancing reasons, that synchronous component is happening via Zoom. But I've seen some beautiful adjustments, and I have to give Anat a lot of credit here for, her mentoring of all these course designs, in that I can think about how to use tools like Ment as either engagement or helping deepen individual learning, or helping to create a social opportunity for learning, and really finding ways of blending all of those across things that are all hybrid and then more or less synchronous or asynchronous. So, I'll leave that as my background and look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thank you for that. I'll jump to Jen. Um, Jen, I want to hear you talk about how a business school sees technologies in general. Like, what do you think is happening now? What do you think will happen post-COVID with technology tools? And even more generally, are tools here to stay?
Yeah, thanks, Davika. I think that I'm very fortunate to be at the business school that has embraced technology for many years. Even pre-COVID, we've had an online graduate diploma in business administration for more than 20 years now. And so we have embraced technology, and I think we're actually really good at it. Tools come and go. And so when you see the instructors start to embrace the learning first, I think that that is the important piece. And when you can find tools like Ment that embrace that learning and can fit seamlessly into that plan, that's where they stick. And so I think where I see us moving towards in the future is working closer together to understand that impact that we're trying to create, whether we're back in the classroom, we're remote, or we're in hybrid learning, and making sure that we craft it together. And so that we really get that maximum experience for our participants. And sitting in executive education, I would say we have multiple perspectives we also have to take into account. And so you'll hear Terry talk about, the faculty perspective. We have students, and we also have clients. And so I think Ment does a really good job at understanding those multiple perspectives and how to engage with technology. And so on the student side, we see that critical thinking piece, the peer learning, and making sure that we get, the rich discussions, no matter what medium we find ourselves in. On the faculty side, I think we see a new dynamic and perspective, being able to use a tool like Ment to kind of take the bird's eye view over discussions when we can't physically be in the same room right now. And then from a client perspective, there's the data on engagement and being able to see that kind of learning journey take place, which is so important to be able to reflect all into that experience. So I don't see technology leaving us anytime soon. Yeah, really pleased to be here to learn more and extend the discussion.
Thank you, Jen. I'll jump to Anat. Anat has a unique role. She's an adjunct professor for many years, but she's also the head of academic partnership for Menta.io. That means she worked with hundreds of universities this year, and they're all trying to adopt to the new norm. Anat, do you mind sharing some of your observations from the last year about adapting to the new norm?
Sure. I'm really, really happy to be here. And I'm really happy to be thinking about these topics, and especially with these esteemed colleagues, um, which I learned a lot from. So thank you. I think that what we saw prior to COVID was instructors like myself, really, who were feeling an urge to incorporate technology, and that's how I got to Menta.io, because I was looking for technologies to incorporate in my teaching. And I think that the instructors that joined us before COVID were those who were always on the search, and then something, and that search, I think, like everything else in life, it all starts with this pain point, right? That you're feeling that you're standing there in class and students have their mobiles and their laptops and they're busy with technology, and it genuinely gave me and other colleagues a bit of a stomach ache when you're standing there kind of fighting for attention. Maybe other instructors just do it better and they don't fight for attention. That's also possible. But I was feeling that this was something that I wanted to solve. And I think it's important to say that we were all teaching, and everyone that I speak to, we were teaching before COVID and we did a decent job, right? We were okay. And we prepared our materials and we prepared our topics, and we were, as Terry mentioned, we were doing fine. The issue was that now there was this additional challenge, which created this huge stomach ache for everyone. So it wasn't just those who maybe weren't that prepared earlier, or it was just for those who felt uncomfortable. And what I'm seeing now, what I have been seeing in this last year, is this quest for how do I keep in touch with my students? How do I feel what it is that they know or don't know and feel comfortable with or uncomfortable with? How do I make that into something that improves my teaching? Because teaching in front of a online teaching is a challenge for those, without the privilege of doing this for 20 years. It was this huge shift, and I think that I meet many professors who chose to meet this challenge, right, very bravely, and say, okay, now what do I need to make sure that I do what I do at least as good as I did it before, right? And that's where Menta.io comes into play. And I do see some of our customers, as you know, Zvika, have been using Menta.io prior to COVID. And I was using it synchronously in class, which is today, I would say, no way. It doesn't make sense. Use it asynchronously, use it between classes, because that's where and when students can truly express themselves. So, and of course, there are those who started right away with the right way of doing it. So I guess there's a lot to say, but I think this kind of is linked into what we had just discussed. And maybe Jen or Terry, you'd like to respond to that.
I'm going to dive in. And when you were saying, you were using it synchronously and now you wouldn't, I see opportunities on both sides, in that how you use it synchronously may not be the obvious way. I'm certainly not going to use, in this new program I only have 2 hours with them face-to-face a week. And I can't imagine saying, oh, go into Ment and continue on the discussion there with each individual person typing away. No. But what I would do is I would say, the example I was working on today is I have a Harvard case. I want them to read that Harvard case. I want them before class to have engaged with that case in terms of, how they could use the strategies in that case from their own entrepreneurial venture. And then, kind of having a dialogue with their colleagues about that and some back and forth. But then in class time, I absolutely intend to put them into breakouts. So we'll be in Zoom in this particular program, put them into breakouts, and then have them look at all those discussions. So this is where the analytics becomes really helpful. If I just had a traditional discussion and I have 40 some odd students in my class, there's no way they're going to be able to really think about all that they're seeing in that normal threaded discussion. But using the analytics, they can sort of dive in to the ones that were getting the highest quality scores, the most activity. And then in those smaller breakouts, sort of start documenting what they see, having that kind of opportunity to have a shared understanding come forward in the smaller group, and actually then write that down. And usually how I'd have them do that is I use a Google slide deck where each breakout has its own slide, and they put their notes in there. And then all the class members, once the class is over, will have access to that. So they kind of get this summarizing opportunity as well. So I would use it. I wouldn't use it to create new content, but I think that's a trick you taught me, and I think it's going to work fabulously.
I love it, and I love it because I think it highlights maybe the most important concept that I found throughout this period of time, which is collaboration, the way knowledge is being created and the way teams are being created. And I think that if before we were okay with students showing up to class and contributing their ideas, and also on traditional discussion boards, right, they contribute their idea and that's it. What Menta.io highlights everywhere, right, in the discussion itself, in the analytics page, in the personal analytics page, in team analytics, everywhere, also in the assessment, is the notion of collaborative discussion. The fact that Terry can say something that Jen would want to respond to, which takes the discussion one step higher. And then I would like to chime in and add a perspective, either challenge the argument or support the argument, which makes for a deeper conversation, which is shared by everyone. And I think that if I took one thing from this period of time, regardless of how I will teach in the future, hybrid, remote, or face-to-face, it's putting emphasis on this collaborative notion of creating knowledge. And I think that what you just described is a way of using this new knowledge created on Ment to make sure that the group works together in digesting, I guess, or evolving that knowledge that they just put into the discussion.
I want to touch on the point of Anat, and I'm sorry if I'm not an official panelist, but I still want to chime in and say that, in my view, what Anat mentions here about collaboration is the fact that learning is some kind of a hybrid of content, which is the taught material, of process, which means how am I going to run the class? Am I going to use software? But I think also, like, the third component is very basic principles or values. Like, if you teach your students that collaborating or that being able to read and resonate with the ideas of others is just as important as creating or crafting the ideas yourself, I think you're kind of equipping them with more comprehensive skill set that makes them a better learner. So it ends up to being better collaborators in class and being able to use their eyes and their ears and not just their mouths and their keyboards, right?
Maybe to even extend it one step further, I think the other thing is the temporal aspect of learning. And we know that the more times that students get to engage and apply that learning, the deeper it'll resonate. And so the fact that we can rethink those times of learning and have them engage when it works for them is also, I think, a really important aspect to add in, and where I see higher education moving, this flexible idea of also engaging the learners when it makes sense within their own lives to pick up that learning as well. And Ment enables that, and instructors at the same time. So
Yeah, so I think Kahneman also, Professor Kahneman speaks about it in the book of Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, right? So sometimes you actually need to have the right mindset and take your time in crafting your ideas. And sometimes you form your best ideas by engaging with the ideas of others. I think that's one of the key principles of asynchronous learning by nature. Not everything happens that same very second, but you want to let ideas dive in. Maybe you can share some of your techniques on how you run discussions in Menta.io. Do you give your students a few days to interact with the questions until you analyze it in class? And any thoughts you have about that, I think will be interesting to the audience, because asynchronous learning is a key component that we might need to spend a few minutes on.
Absolutely. And I was kind of keeping notes and I had two thoughts. And I think Anat had raised one of these points already, that sometimes, some people are going to feel comfortable raising their hand high. I mean, Harvard teaches how to raise your hand so that, the instructor will actually call on you and you can participate in the class. But that's one person getting to participate in the class. And as I was, again, working on this case discussion today, I was thinking, well, the beauty here is it isn't just going to be one person reporting out. It's going to be everyone reporting out and people being able to do it on their own time frame and in the way they feel most comfortable. But to that point, in terms of the days I give them, and what I do is I set a due date in Canvas for their first contribution, either a top level answer or some kind of a response. But I always make it very clear that and I believe the analytics as well, equally value the top level answer as well as a response. And so they don't have to grandstand, right? They don't have to. The idea is what's going to be given the focus, but I'll give them a due date in Canvas for that first one. And then I give them encouragement to come back several times during whatever the time frame is, if it's a week or a couple of days between the next session, so that they don't feel that they have to be on every single day. And I also tell them to be sure that they have their notifications both within Mint and within Canvas set in a way that helps their workflow. Because I want to manage that expectation of participation that, I have had some students who seem to be trying to game the system, and the other students, kind of remarked on that. So there was a little bit of joint restraint added. But I like to set those expectations. And I think that's something I've gotten better at, is setting the expectations from the beginning. But I also want to respond. I'm looking at the chat from Jennifer, the math teacher in New Jersey. And my dad was a math teacher in California. And I was thinking, well, don't think that because I'm talking about doing a case analysis, it'd be the same kind of thing as asking someone to come to the board and kind of work the problem. That one person got to come to the board and work the problem, or in some settings where I've had multiple boards, maybe 5 people are getting to work the problem, but I want everyone to be able to do it. And the other beauty of that piece is if you have students in the class whose language skills vary, English is not their first language, perhaps, and I've had the chance to teach internationally, I get so much better participation when people can type their answers. That, it's always something that I want to be able to have to do, even if I am teaching synchronously. The idea that someone could push a comment or a response without having to do that in a live verbal setting.
I wholeheartedly join, and I think that the inclusivity is such a key aspect of teaching. We want to truly hear our students, and I've shared this story before with Carrie and Jen, how my first experience with Menta.io, the most striking experience was that I was under the impression that I understand my students when I was teaching face to face. And I'm very engaging in class. I ask a lot of questions. I let them express their opinions, and I was finishing every class feeling really, really great most of the times, because it seemed that they all understood. And then I used Menta.io, and the first discussion that I posted, some of my students did not understand what was going on in class, truly did not. And to me, it was a sort of a wake-up call to say, well, I could either deny this and say, well, I'm not going to see this anymore, or I can embrace this and make sure that all my students are on board. And they do have valuable things to say, right? So I want them, it's important to me that I know where they stand, and it's important to me that they can bring their thoughts and ideas to the table. So it's such a valuable and such an important experience. And of course, since then, I'm truly enjoying the fact that those who want to participate in the discussions can bring themselves and their ideas and their thoughts and their experience. Very often they have experience and knowledge about what we teach them that there is no way to bring to class, because how many people can speak in the limited synchronous time, right? So I think that's extremely important. And I want to add to that the perspective of what questions do we use when we ask discussion questions on Menti.io, as opposed to the questions that I would ask in class. And I think Terry was giving an excellent example of, let them, for example, discuss the case before we learn it, because then they bring their creativity and their initial thoughts and their kind of raw ideas. And then we can take the discussion to the next level in the synchronous time that we have together. And one of the things that I enjoy doing most is discussing with instructors the type of discussions that are worthwhile to ask, right? So discussions about the topics that we're about to learn, about topics that we've learned, about those that the students find interesting and have no room to share with their friends in the normal kind of, in the synchronous session. And there are different ways of asking a discussion question, and it always has to be interesting, which is key, right? But there are different keys that you want to use. So I think that, yeah, that would be my addition to the important things that you just mentioned. And I think that's important, how and why we would use discussion questions and the difference that it makes over just speaking with students in class or just surveying them for that purpose, which is so much more confined to the options that we provide them with, rather than let's let you bring yourself as a student and as a person to the learning process.
And just to add maybe a story to that, Annette, it makes me think of when we brought this in to a data and analytics program. And some of the instructors initially said that, I can't use a discussion forum to have students post on, data and analytics answers. It just doesn't make sense. They were thinking very quantitatively, and that there wouldn't be diversity in thought or anything like that. And so the way that Ment has it set up, it actually enriches and extends that learning so much, because even with a quantitative answer, there's so many different perspectives on how it can be presented in data and analytics. And so you even saw the instructors start to see, I think, the beauty of that extension of learning and bringing it in for some critical thought and discussion through having the forum set up that way to encourage the diversity in perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that story really does encapsulate the fact that we've seen this movement from different disciplines and from different fields. And one of the best ways to that manifests that is the fact that the Menti.io has code snippets and LaTeX that you can use. And it's all a question of really, how do you engage your students regardless of the topic that you're teaching, or maybe not regardless, but embracing your topic and still bringing students on board for this meaningful experience. Yeah.
So, so one comment, just a sanity check, just to let everyone know we're already like halfway through and there's many more questions to go, but I do want to ask our audience and encourage you to keep asking questions on the Q&A. I see that the panelists are very excited to address your questions, so keep them going and I'll try to make sure that we cover as many of them as possible. We also have a dedicated inbox, which is webinars at Ment.io, so you can obviously send most of the questions or anything that you want offline, and we are surely going to address them. So I'm just putting the dedicated inbox here over chat, but then we can continue to the next questions. We have a lot more to cover. Okay.
Svika, I wanted to build off Jen's point, and then I'm leaving Luis's question for Anat, because I think she's going to have the best perspective on that one. But as Jennifer was describing our analytics program, and these are working professionals, and I was also thinking about the feedback that we're able to give based on Mint.io discussions is going to be helpful far beyond the course. If we think about how we do our work today, whether it's in Microsoft Teams or maybe it's a more social thing on some other piece of social media, we're engaging in discussions. And if people can learn through reflection and coaching using the analytics that are part of that self-view, then there's an opportunity for them to take the skills that they've gained within these particular kinds of discussions and use them more broadly. So anytime I can say to a working professional participant in my classes, you can do this in your own setting. Go out and do it yourself. You don't need a teacher to be setting this up for you, I think is of great benefit.
I'm sorry, Zvika, I want to connect to what Terry's saying and also answer Luis, if that's okay. I think you're absolutely right. And I think part of the attraction of the platform is the fact that it speaks to real qualities and real values in life that we value at work and are important at work. And that connects for me to Luis's question, because the question is, how do we prepare kind of this balance between the asynchronous discussions and what we need to do in class? And I think that my answer to that would be, you would want to use Mint.io as an integral part of the teaching process. It should be weaved into the process. And by that, I mean that just like in real life, the different platforms that you use real life, right? As opposed to the learning process where you can make mistakes and you're required to do things like handing assignments. But so in work life, everything is weaved together. You don't have an assignment to go on Slack or on Microsoft Teams and connect with people. It's part of the working flow. And I think that what happens in Mint.io is similar to that, in the sense that I connect everything that goes on in my class to the feedback or the insights I find on the Mint.io discussions. I finish a class by sharing my screen, showing my students the 3 discussions for the week. And one of them is about what we just talked about. Another is about the materials that we're about to discuss next week. And the third one is usually something that I ask them, what did you want to discuss today and we didn't get to? But I share it with them, and that's how we conclude the synchronous time together. Then they have a few days to engage in the discussion, and we can talk about, different instructors take part or decide not to take part in the discussions according to their own preference. But to me, the important part is that by next time, when I'm preparing my next class, and I have most of it prepared, right? I know what I was going to teach. That's the pre-planned part. But I go on the discussions and I extract insights that I want to acknowledge the students about, insights that I want to help me alleviate the topics that I wanted to discuss for this coming class. And so I always open my classes with a slide from our Mint.io discussions this week. And I also incorporate different comments into the entire slide. So it doesn't take a lot of work for me, and yet it really weaves nicely the planned areas with the ones that are more spontaneous, I guess, that I didn't know the students would write. So I normally close a discussion a day before class, which gives me enough time to sit and kind of overview the discussions and decide what I'd like to incorporate. And I hope that answers the question. And I think that is a way to kind of weave everything together and make this into a meaningful, seamless experience, in the sense that this is what this is what humans are about. It's about right now, but it's also about the more deep ideas, the deeper ideas that I come up with when I have the time to sit and think about what I was asked.
And I can give an example from a programmatic perspective too, where we have multiple instructors working. And for that one, we used a weekly rhythm to the learning. And so we would open up a discussion on a Sunday and have learners engage with online content and a discussion board, and then come into a synchronous class on a Thursday evening per se, where they would extend the learning, similar to like what you had just mentioned, Anat, where they're engaging in deeper discussions, maybe a little bit of new content or extension of content, and looping that learning in. And then we use the Thursday night to Saturday for reflection. So they can actually go back to the boards again and try and incorporate that extension of learning, and maybe their opinions have changed or they have new things to add, and it really deepens and enriches that experience for them.
Thank you, Jen. I'm just trying to quickly run through some questions that we got over chat, but also over emails. People are really into your tips and tricks about getting the outliers or the less involved students, how to get them involved in class. Another question that was asked, like tips and tricks about collecting the questions or the feedbacks from those who are not necessarily the first one to engage. How would you engage them better? How would you make them feel part of the overall discussion or process?
Yeah, I was typing a response to Jason, but let's go here. The first question I would have is, are the tools that you have available now, do they offer you analytics to know if the outliers are at least lurking? Because if the answer is they're not even lurking, then I'm not good enough to know how to handle that one. But if they're at least lurking, then I'm happy. And I can imagine that you could use that information to say, clearly you're engaged, maybe you can try and do this at least one time next week. And then for the students where maybe I get nothing out of them in the larger group setting, then if I move into breakouts and sometimes show up in those breakouts, they always have their camera on in their breakouts, and they're often very engaged in that smaller group. So I make sure I keep my breakouts fairly small, say 4 people or 3 people in some settings. If I think there are a lot of talkers there, I'll keep it down to 3, just to make sure that all of them are getting that chance to engage a little bit. But having analytics that let me know that at least they're looking is really helpful too.
And I think I'll add to that, and I'm wondering whether to share my screen and show it rather than just talk about it. But the analytics that Menti.io, well, if Jen and Terry are nodding, then by all means I will. So the analytics that Menti.io provides helps the students and empower the students to reflect about the way that they behave in class. And part of it is giving them information such as this: how many answers by others have I read, right? Which speaks to that point of it. You're not always expected, we are not always expected to be articulating our arguments in this perfect manner. And I think that what Menti.io does is give subtle nudges, and they might be subtle to different degrees, right? Because some indicators or some bits of analysis are linked to the assessment and others aren't. But for example, Menti.io is showing the students who they interact with and agree with most. And if a student sees that she's in 100% agreement with her best friend over a while, that's a very subtle nudge to say, well, you might want to be collaborating with additional people in class, right? Because you could speak to your best friend all the time. And the same goes to how thorough I am and how collaborative I am with additional people in the class. And the view that I have as an instructor, which is this page of assessment, which is only available to the instructors, is a view that enables me to see who's struggling in terms of collaborating with people, for example, and who's doing a fantastic job in responding to more people, or who is reading but not actively writing. And so I have these components of assessment that make it easier for me to understand how to nudge or empower my students towards better discussions. And I think part of MENT's analytics, and I mentioned this earlier, is very much targeted on collaboration, on this is the way new knowledge is being created, and this is what we'd like to give emphasis on. And I think that's important because we do try to acknowledge, the platform acknowledges, and we as instructors try to acknowledge that there are different types of people. And some prefer just reading and expressing their opinion once, but they do have opinions, and maybe they prefer voting over writing verbal comments. And the voting on Menti.io enables a range, a granular range between a full agreement and a disagreement. So you could do all these things around, you don't have to, it's not all the same formula. That, I guess that's my point. And I think that's very important to all of us as we acknowledge that, you know, people are different from one another.
Thank you for that. Let's another question that was asked, and I kind of wanted your insights on. It was actually sent via email. It's about providing an equally engaging experience in class. I think it ties to what we already discussed about the students who might have less confidence to participate, the outliers, but still the equality in engagement, I think, goes more than just making sure you address the outliers. Are there any techniques to assure or to give the right confidence that the technology stack really helps equalities and not kind of differentiates the more dominant ones than others? What's your take on that?
I can just speak from my particular perspective, and I'll share that I'm teaching in a management of technology program to working professionals. I'm teaching in programs of scientists and engineers who are launching new ventures. So they're very much already technologically engaged. And most of the time they're working in companies that are doing, you know, probably the vast majority of their work in some kind of an online setting, although, you know, tying together, you know, water cooler conversations that they might have. But many of them also are very deeply tied into virtual work in general. And I think it's the presentation differences that we're most able to address in this context. You know, I made the point about the hands up, and the Harvard situation there, it was that they noticed through their own analytics, because they have a TA in every single session kind of helping grade participation, that the women either weren't raising their hand in a way that they would then be called on, but maybe it was like, you know, half high. So they brought in a military officer to teach them how to appropriately raise their hand. And I thought, well, is it that they need to learn how to appropriately raise their hand, or the classroom setting needs to have multiple ways to participate? And in some contexts, so I can imagine your hardcore MBA class, yes, you have to learn how to stand up and present. That's simply going to be a part of your job. And if we aren't enabling you to do that and giving you chances to practice that, we're not doing our jobs. On the other hand, if I'm a lab researcher, that may not be the best way for me to be communicating in a more aggressive Q&A strategy. And so what I think I'm able to offer then in the classroom setting is a wider variety of mechanisms to engage. And that's really wonderful. And that is something too that I will do as I look at the analytics. I want to see that even if you aren't responding like a Not was, even if you aren't getting your own content up there, are you at least reading your your colleagues' work. If you're not reading your colleagues' work, you're going to hear from me with individual feedback. And that's going to be something that certainly is going to affect your contribution grade, which is a little odd, right? Because it's, how am I contributing? I'm contributing by giving respect to the work that my colleagues have done. And so I'm always looking for different ways. And I'm sure there are, from the chat, I can tell there are people who are deeply tied to different educational modes. But even the idea that someone could draw their response and post it versus having to do it in a text format, right? So they could videotape a response, things like that. I want to give them all those opportunities. And if other people have other examples, I'd love to hear those.
I think that's such an important topic, and I think it concerns us constantly. What is it that we do to enable different types of challenges that people encounter, that our students encounter, and the differences between them? Speaking technically about the tool, I'll say that I have been using the platform has the ability, you could announce to the entire class, right? Which sends an email notification to everyone. And this I usually use to tell them, well, please provide more data, or please engage in this way or that way. But there are additional ways as well, such as a one-on-one chat that you could use between the instructor and the student. It's not between the students and themselves, which enables me to kind of give that encouragement or direct someone outside the realm of the discussion, but still within the platform, to a place where, for example, if someone expressed a brilliant idea, and I don't want to be the one, and it somehow had been overlooked because they didn't phrase it exactly in a way that is catchy to everyone else or something, and you know, they overlooked it for some reason, then I would normally either write on this personal one-on-one option and say, you wrote a wonderful idea, please try to do this and that, or let's make sure that others notice this. And so you try to give greater visibility. And I do notice, I have to say, I have, well, the society I live in is fairly diverse, and the students I teach are fairly diverse. And I notice differences. The, you know, the shy ones who are not taking part in class at all, but they are on the Menti.io discussions and they bring their own style to the table. Sometimes it will just be a reference to something that they think is very meaningful, and it stirs up the entire discussion, and that's fantastic. So I think there are different ways to express yourself on Menti.io, which answers for many different types of personas and many different types of differences. But I am, to kind of tie it all in, I want to say this, for me, it's not about using one platform or one way of communicating with the students. I think it's really important for all of us to try and reach out to them in different ways. And the professors that I admire most are those, and I learned so much from, are those who are constantly hands-on and empowering their students and noticing their needs and their abilities, and you know, doing this wholeheartedly, and that's beautiful to see, and I learn from them every day, and I try to be that when I teach. So I think it's about using every possible way that we have to make sure that all of our students have a way to meaningfully engage in the topics that we teach.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I can see this shift happening where it's starting to be an assessment for learning instead of an assessment of learning, where we're getting away from that test perspective and really trying to engage and be present, I think, within the community of learners, because we all have so much to give when we do share our perspectives. And so you can see kind of us moving along that continuum to appreciate that. And tools like Ment, I think, kind of bring that out in those discussions, and also give that critical lens, right, to see how you're interacting and perhaps changing your behavior. If you're tending to favor one type of discussion or continually responding to a certain group of people, it allows you to have that analytic to then make a choice and say, okay, maybe I'm going to try and extend my thought with this different group of people or in a different way in the discussion. And so it's a nice way to have a different perspective when you're reflecting too.
And I think sorry, just adding to that point, because I agree so much. And I want to say experimenting with that makes perfect sense, right? There are different ways of asking questions, different ways of inviting students to participate. I usually do not prefer not to invite my students to the traditional way of asking questions, which is more like an assignment, right? That you define that, please hand in your answer before you can join the discussion. But that's also an option on the platform. And sometimes that encourages them to think more deeply personally or on the individual level before they go into a wider discussion. So I think both the platform and everything around it, of course, enables for exploring what works best for this particular group and for this particular topic that we're teaching. That's also part of how we do what we do.
I'd like to address Stephanie's comment about AI. Basically, one of the things that we sometimes hear is, what is the assessment that's being done by the software? How does it fit into the overall process? Can people really trust AI to take part in student assessment? So, first of all, the key to everything, I think, is transparency. The fact that each student can see in the product assessment exactly what their assessment is composed of. So it can be analyzed together in a one-on-one session with the instructor who's equipped with showing them how collaborative they were, how balanced they were in their arguments, how thorough they've been. I think this is step one. But if you think about the different parameters that kind of drives you toward an action of taking a software, and I'm sure Jen maybe can talk from a school perspective of choosing a tool and how do you even assure that it's successful. I think that in one of the things that we're doing when we're trying to onboard instructors is, first of all, to give them the sense of control, right? The fact that there is an AI engine in the backend does not mean that you relinquish control and give the tool the ability to grade your students. You're just getting more information, but the decision is yours. So I think it's about control. I think it's about safety. I think it's also about fairness. You are being able to demonstrate that the software is fair towards all. And I think maybe the last component is about being predictable, right? There is a way to prove that specific actions or specific behavior or specific participation drives a specific assessment. So if you are able to prove control, fairness, predictability, I think you're on the right track of being able to get the right buy-in. And Jen, I'm actually interested in your comment. Like, how did you come up with a process to assure success, or even to overcome challenges that could be a standard part of implementing a software in a business school?
Yeah, absolutely. I think our first step usually is we understand what a faculty team is trying to achieve in terms of the learning objectives. And then we look at all available options in order for them to get there. And then we select the right path forward, kind of in a collaborative way. And so in the case of MENT, I think we were struggling to find that way to have that social learning piece, as well as the analytics and the ability to integrate into our online environment in a secure way. And so we went through and looked at actually various different tools that we could use to solve the problem. And I think a large piece of our decision actually came around the collaboration in trying to solve that with MENT. And so it wasn't just, here's the tool, take it and go. It was a continual engagement around trying to solve that learning need. And so at the school level, after we had passed through the security checks and the onboarding and things like that, it really was setting up that group of people on our side around the technology piece, as well as keeping that faculty team engaged so that they could share their learning and kind of pay it forward with other instructors. And then really having the MENT team side by side with us along the way to make sure that we were continually implementing the suggestions. And you don't get that a lot with different providers. And so I think that really set it apart and has been part of our success in this journey so far.
Wow, thank you, Jen. And just because we have 1 minute and I want to be respectful for everyone's time, maybe a concluding remark by each of you, if you may, just 10 seconds of a concluding remark.
All right, I'll go first, and I'll just say I use MENT differently every time I'm teaching. I see my colleagues use it differently, and so what I'm so thankful for is the flexibility in terms of how we can each, either design our questions in a way or design the use and the assignments in a way that meets all these different kinds of course needs. And so as I've had to change my courses every single term under a different version, just very thankful for that flexibility.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I truly learned a lot from all of you, and I think this was a great opportunity to share the knowledge that you have and your experience with Menti.io, and I hope that others will test out the product and try it out for themselves. Reach out if you need anything. Thanks.
All right.
I guess.
Thank you so much. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I guess my concluding remark would be that I feel extremely fortunate to be learning from instructors every day, and from just I feel that all of this community is our colleagues who are interested in constantly learning, evolving, and making sure that we do what we do in the best possible way. So really a deep thank you to Jen and to Terry for enabling this throughout the year. And thank you so much for your knowledge and for your friendship and partnership.
I'll echo that quickly and just say that it's so nice to have that power of learning, I think, in all of our discussions, and that we're taking it from all these different perspectives and really trying to enrich that experience.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We look forward to being in touch. I sent our inbox over chat. We'll send the recording shortly, and we're happy to see you in our next event. Please try out Menti.io, reach out to us, and hope to be in touch very soon. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.